welcome. My name is Kevin Lynn.
I'm Steve Lamb.
And we are the Center for Progressive Urban Politics. And this is our weekly news wrap-up for April 11th, 2015. And at our weekly news wrap-ups, we like to talk about things that have happened in the news that are international,
National,
state,
and local.
So without
we cover the full spectrum.
We really do. So without any further ado, Steve, a quick scan of what we're going to talk about today. The drought has been in the news and is in the news, so I think that's something we should probably chat about.
Well, it's interesting when we talk about the alleged hopeful technological fixes, because they really maybe aren't.
Yeah, a little techno-narcissism on the part of some of our planners and deep thinkers. Also, the Iran deal continues in the press.
Right.
You have a couple articles you were talking about earlier on police abuse.
Well, we've got the city of Pasadena is trying to deep six the sheriff's department report on the Kendrick McDade shooting because their officers violated policy. And then we've got a representative in Texas who wants to make it illegal to photograph policemen.
So there's a wall instead of transparency between us and those who are there to serve and protect us.
Well, there's a problem. Everybody in the world now has a camera. And it's on their cell phone. And, like this week I was driving along and I came to a stop because I saw a whole bunch of militarized police showing up at a guy's house. I just took out my cell phone and started recording.
Yeah, and that could be illegal.
And some people would like that to be illegal.
And also, wasn't there an incident in San Bernardino?
Oh, yes, a very hilarious story where a guy who was...
We'll talk about that. And also, I'd like to talk about, there are a couple senators that are looking to investigate H1B Visa abuse on the part of one of our local companies, SoCal Edison.
Turns out Ross Perot was right.
Yeah, what can't be outsourced will be insourced, and vice versa.
Vice versa.
Okay, so how about we jump into the drought?
Okay. We're all in the drought if we're in California.
If you're in California, you're in the drought.
And if you're in the rest of the world, you're in California's drought. You just don't know it yet.
Why is that, Steve? Why is California's water problem everyone's problem?
Well, the United States produces 25% of the world's food. California produces 60% of that 25%. So we're roughly 13-14% of the world's food supply, and if that gets disrupted, there will be major food famine, shortage, and inflation worldwide.
Because don't all the almonds in the U.S. come from California?
90% of the world's almonds come from California.
90%. All the canned tomatoes, right?
I think it's 70 or 80% of the world's canned tomatoes come from California, yes.
Wow. And that's just to name a few.
Artichokes, asparagus, fresh vegetables, fresh strawberries, all through Europe. When you go to Europe and it's strawberry season, you'll see all through Europe in the markets, California strawberries.
Wow. So it really is a worldwide problem.
Worldwide problem.
Well, I'm concerned because last week, $1 billion package was signed into law to address some of the, doing for conservation programs as well as other programs to mitigate the impact of the drought. But also, I'm concerned where I'm seeing things for desalination plants, which I think it's, again, a case of techno-narcissism on the part of our planners, in that they think that there's a technological pill that will get us out. There's a quick fix to this. And I can't think of anything more destructive in terms of energy return on energy invested, the environment, than these desal plants.
Well, it's strange. My father worked on the early desal plants when he worked at Aerojet General. And they were originally part of the military-industrial complex. And the military decided that they didn't want them because they couldn't be made efficient. And when you're too inefficient for military spending,
you got a problem. Because I know that there have been some increases in efficiency in the diaphragm technology,
Yes.
because you push the salt water through these diaphragms,
Which traps the salt and the
traps the
minerals.
salt.
Yeah.
But even so, the little research that I've been able to do, it takes about 15,000 kilowatt hours to produce 1,000,000 gallons of drinkable water. And understand, that's about half the water that comes in.
I know, Kevin, we can put solar panels on the top of the plant.
We could. That would certainly mitigate some of the energy usage. But when you think about it, 15,000. There's a plant in Carlsbad that's being built right now, and at its height, it should be able to produce about 50 million gallons a day.
How many people is that?
That's about 110,000 people it's expected to serve.
So roughly 3/4 of the city of Pasadena.
Correct.
Okay.
And you think about what it's, if you know what I said earlier about the 15,000 kilowatt hours per million gallons. Californians, you pay about 21 cents a kilowatt hour.
Okay.
So that's about $3,248 to on just energy use.
That's at current prices, but the problem is California no longer has regulated public utilities in the way we used to. We put everything over on the exchange, and of course, if we have a gigantic raise in power to desal, we'll have a raise in rates.
Which could certainly happen. 2 years ago, we took San Onofre,
right,
one of California's 2 nuclear reactors, offline.
We've been taking hydroelectric dams offline, and the drought is taking them offline where we're not.
Absolutely. So these are all we're requiring, making it part of the infrastructure, the need for more power and energy. And we're pulling a lot of our energy assets offline. Meanwhile, our population keeps rising.
Well, you know, Kevin, this is the thing that's the tribe of 700 gigantic maroon elephants in the room that everyone refuses to look at. And I you know, every time I get into a political conversation with everyone, they think somehow I'm a racist whenever I say we really need to voluntarily control our population. Now, I don't know where in that phrase is the word race at all. But you know, I don't have any children. I don't think you have any children, as far as I know. And I made that decision consciously because there are too many people here.
And when you look at it, if you look at, well, in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, we seem to understand that you can't have a conservation policy unless you have a population policy.
Yep.
In the 70s, there were all these books, Limits to Growth, Population Bomb, as well as, like in our movies, Soylent Green, which really kind of, they were all these Armageddon books of what's going to happen if we don't control our population. In the 80s, all that seemed to just go right out the window.
Oddly enough, it went out the window with the acceptance of mass illegal immigration.
Right, 86, the amnesty of 86, we really did change everything, particularly when it came to enforcement.
Right. But it's not just that, it's children. We're having worldwide too many children. And you know, it's hilarious because whenever I say that, also people say, well, you know, you're one of these elites who doesn't want people to have children. It's not that I don't want people to have children. It's that, you know, there is a carrying capacity somewhere. There is a maximum load somewhere. And you know, in my practice in engineering, when I design things and buildings, I always try to leave a 20% reserve.
Okay. Imagine that.
Yeah, and it seems to be that the thing with population is people are trying to figure out how they can exceed the known limits by 50% and get away with it. And you know, desal plants, you know, they're a fun little technology. They're cute. They're much more expensive and much less useful than sewage reclamation, which no one wants to do because that's dirty. And you know, I have a real simple use for that. We could take recycled sewage water and put it on farmland. It's high in nitrates. You use nitrates for fertilizer. That would tend to put a few petroleum.
And the kilowatt hours required for 1,000,000 gallons of sewage treated water is half that of a desal plant.
Right. And so it makes a lot more sense to build sewage reclamation. And we're under federal mandate to do it anyway. fact, recently I was commenting on the general plan for the city of Los Angeles, the county of Los Angeles, and they're planning to gigantically grow the population. And one of my comments was, where exactly in this plan are you placing the sewage reclamation plants you need for this population? We're already at 120% of the known capacity. They're planning on raising the county population 30% and not building a single sewage rec plant.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Yep.
It's funny, I just thought of, in 2011 in Colorado, they started a project to take water from the Arkansas River and pipe it to Colorado Springs. And the reason they're doing that is, again, that the population pressures are such that they need the water. But it's a 62-mile pipeline uphill.
Ooh.
So
it's pure liquid electricity.
Exactly. To get that water pumped up a hill for 62 miles. Another example of techno-narcissism and a inability to face the reality that there are, I think, limits to growth. And
wouldn't it make more sense to just say we're not going to issue any more building permits in this city, and please move down the river where the water is?
Why not? Because the municipalities are all going broke regardless. Library hours are being closed. There's so many services that are being...
That's because they're shipping water 62 miles uphill.
All the money's going there.
Water flows generally in one direction, down.
And that's another thing about our snowpacks. For instance, this year, the California water content, the water content of the California snowpack in the mountains is 6% of normal.
That's a 1,000-year event.
And last year it was just 25% of normal.
Well, that's a 500-year event.
And the thing, what feeds us here in Los Angeles, a lot of that river comes from upstream, from up in the mountains, and it's all fed by gravity.
It's more or less energy free. There is some pumping, but
Sure.
You're not pumping at 400 miles.
Correct. It's pretty much flowing down, and it's relatively speaking, relative to the Colorado River project, it's cheap water for us.
And it's sweet. It's got less salt in it because it's dehydrated less on its distance and travel. Yeah.
And that's the stuff we're really running out of.
Yeah, well, and that's the good stuff.
Yeah. And what was interesting is I live in Echo Park, and there in the park there's a large pond, and there's an artesian well shooting up. And most Californians wouldn't remember this because it's generations ago, but when people first started to move to Los Angeles in the late 1800s, you could literally, there's a town called Artesia because you could tap into the aquifer and the water would shoot up. Most of it was wasted. It just was allowed to run right into the ocean.
Yeah, well, we don't
have
that condition anymore because we've pumped it down so much. My house was built in 1906, and it was built as a ranch, and it was specifically chosen by the guy who built it because the groundwater was at that time so high here. And he literally planted his crops that he grew, and after the first year they didn't need any water because of the high water table until the 1940s when they started really pumping really hard, and he actually had to use water then. But before that he didn't have to use any water. And we've continued to pump. We're down now about 350 feet, and we used to be at...
That was at surface at one time.
That was basically at 6 feet.
Oh my gosh.
In 1906, yeah.
Wow, it's a different world.
Yeah.
And at that time the population would be much, because it was so much smaller than it is today, much better able to handle a shock of the kind of drought we're going through today. But now, at the population we are, statewide, 38 million people. Our population is set to double in the next 82 years, so that'll be almost 60 million people.
80 million.
80 million people, right. Think about it. It's really doomsday. And
well, if that happens, we won't be growing any food in this state.
We absolutely won't.
Which means
there won't be room to grow the food.
Exactly. Which means we'll have a larger population, we'll have no access to food for ourselves, and the world will lose 14% of its foodstuffs.
Something to ponder.
I'm glad I'm going to be dead before then.
So now that we've bummed our audience out, let's move on to the next topic, which is the Iran deal. That's been in the press for the last few weeks.
You know, it's very strange to me because, of course, I listen to Benjamin Netanyahu, and he says all sorts of terrible things about this deal. And then President Obama says, oh, no, that's not true. And then there's this guy named Rouhani. He's the president of Iran. And he basically says the deal points are the same as what Netanyahu says they are. And so, you know, I'm kind of curious as to what it is we're talking about. But I think that the really biggest problem with this deal is this is a deal between Iran, the United States, China, Russia, Britain, and France. And so my question is, well, where's Saudi Arabia? Well, where's Lebanon? Well, where's Jordan? Well, where's Qatar? Well, where's the United Arab Emirate Republics? Where are the people in the region who are going to be affected by this? And apparently they're not at the table.
Well, I think when you look at the motivating factors behind this deal, the United States is imposing sanctions on Iran.
Yes.
And we've gotten a lot of our friends and allies to impose sanctions on Iran.
Yes.
And I think it's a case of unfair leverage that we're placing on them. You know, I guess no one wants Iran to have nukes. Personally, I think they're going to want to have them because the U.S. has trained everyone in the Mideast to want them. The one lesson learned from Iraq by all the players in the Mideast is don't let the Americans mass and have nukes. You won't get messed with.
Well, certainly, you know, until it was clear to us that Saddam Hussein did not have nukes, we didn't go in and invade. And once we finally were absolutely sure he didn't have nukes, we went in and broke his country.
Yeah, but, you know, the inspections seemed to be efficient and effective enough to determine that he didn't have them. But again, if he had them, we probably wouldn't have invaded.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to invade North Korea anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, that gets us to a whole nother angle where, frankly, I don't believe the people that run our country want to see North Korea go away, ever.
Because they're useful?
They're very useful. If they are raison d'etre to be in Northeast Asia,
right.
If they go away, what excuse can we have for keeping 25,000 troops on the Korean Peninsula, a large fleet there?
People looking over with their binoculars at China and all our alleged allies.
Right. And Korea, a unified Korea, because Korea was artificially divided. They're a homogenous race.
Exactly like the Middle East. The Middle East was, by more or less the same powers, artificially divided into nations that are guaranteed to fail.
Guaranteed to fail. I think that's a lot of it there. But with Korea, if and when it unifies, it'll probably assume the role or relationship it's had with China for centuries, which is the younger brother, older brother. You know, China will exercise suzerainty over it.
Which we don't want that.
Which we don't want that. Japan certainly doesn't want that.
Right.
So I think, you know, for some reason, we're going to make sure that we supply North Korea with enough food and keep it, you know, being the boogeyman and everything. But back to Iran, yeah, it's. I personally would like to see a deal happen. I think it's an important first step, if nothing else, to normalizing the relationship with Iran. And
yeah, of course, this is going to mean that the Saudis are going to have a bomb.
Probably. I mean, I think in time, Persia has always exercised cultural hegemony over that area.
Yes, and the Saudis have never liked it.
Robert Kaplan, in his book on geography, had talked about how when you look at the countries in and around there, like Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Stan is Persian for place.
Yeah.
So it just kind of shows a little. It's a vivid example of the kind of cultural hegemony Iran could practice if they got rid of the crazies. If they were able to come up with a more moderate, more secular leadership, I think they would actually be able to exercise more influence and power in that area. Because right now I think people just look, or other countries look and go, we don't want any of that. So,
Too bad the Shah went so crazy.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, moving on to crazy people, let's talk about the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department.
Now they pulled out a can of whoop ass this week, didn't
Oh,
they?
they sure did. There was some unfortunate individual who was fleeing from them and got on top of someone else's horse and ran away. And
What's that horse chase?
it was a horse chase. It was a horse thief. And he got chased by a whole bunch of vehicles and got trapped and got off the horse and laid down on the ground and put his hands behind him waiting to get handcuffed. And they kicked and stomped and beat him with batons, and it all got caught on helicopter video footage.
Wow.
And,
So what is? I mean, you look at all these instances of police violence.
Mhm.
Was it that? Do you think it was that it just wasn't being reported in the past, or is there a new phenomenon at work here?
Well, I've been beaten by the police before.
Okay.
And I can tell you that the police report never bears any semblance to reality. And that used to work just fine when it was your word against the cops. But now everybody and their little brother's got a video camera on their cell phone. And, a lot of these people we're finding out are being beat and shot in the back and all sorts of other illegal things. And we've got a video record of it now that's really difficult for the police to deny.
Which brings us to what a Texas representative, Villalobos, wants to make it illegal for police to tape. For citizens to
for
tape
citizens
police.
to tape police closer than 25 feet if they're unarmed or 100 feet if they're armed.
Oh, because they have open carry.
They have open carry in the state of Texas. Although, I don't know. If you're one of those real patriotic Americans, if you listen to the rhetoric and you see a policeman illegally and unconstitutionally assaulting someone and you're armed, well, it gets a whole lot uglier than your videotape.
Right.
But this Jason Villalobos, he wants to make it illegal to photograph police too close. And, of course, you can see why you would want to discourage the photographing of police, because it's costing cities and states millions upon millions of dollars
to defend
mm-hmm. against these acts. And it's getting harder and harder to just steamroll over people who because there's tape now all the time.
But it's crazy, Steve. I mean, they're shooting kids for having toy guns. They're
during various talks with the Pasadena police chief, we had an incident 3 years ago where a young man, Kendrick McDade, was shot, and they're still trying to suppress the Independent Office of Review's report on that. But during talks with the police chief and the NAACP at that point, I suggested to him that since he was getting a lot of veterans from the Gulf Wars, that perhaps he wanted to test them and treat them for PTSD. And he was furious over that. But, I see that they're using on American civilians tactics that we illegally used in the Middle East. And these are tactics that violate the Geneva Convention, but that our military has been using for the last decade and a half.
Wow.
The war came home, as Abby Hoffman always said.
Yeah, it's. I think there's going to be a lot more of it before it gets. It just seems that we're militarizing our police departments. Not only are these guys coming back from the military, going into the police forces, but they're also equipped like they were in the military.
Oh yeah,
sniper rifles. You just look at how they're outfitted anyway. They're all, the average police officer looks like the SWAT team member of the 1970s.
I told you earlier that I took out my video camera when I saw these policemen. They were actually walking down the street in full riot gear, and it turns out they were actually doing a parole inspection of this guy's house. at 7 in the morning.
7 in the morning.
Yeah. And but they were there for 2 hours. I mean, they went through the entire house doing their parole inspection. They interviewed everyone who was there. They put hoops on the dogs' necks and put sticks on them, and put the dogs in a van so they'd be away from the people. I mean, it was really intense for this parole violation inspection, and but they're showing up to people's houses now to do zoning inspections like that.
Wow.
And there were a couple of officers who had rifles with clips, and all of them had their guns, all of them had riot helmets, all of them had bulletproof vests, all of them had mace, all of them had, nunchucks. It was like, I would have thought that they were coming because there was some guy who was a terrorist or something, but they were coming, over some guy who, they're doing a parole check on some guy who sold a little too much weed a couple of years ago.
Wow.
Crazy.
Wow. Interesting times. All right, let's move on to our next topic, which is an article that was in the LA Times this week. Senators seek a federal investigation of alleged H1B visa abuse by SoCal Edison, one of our local utilities.
We're just having a love fest with Edison and PG&E.
Yeah, we are. Last week, brought to light Utilities Commission issues. And
the Utility Commission just laid down on PG&E for their unsafe acts, the largest fine in PUC history. But this one, these guys should, just be flogged in public for.
Yeah, this apparently, the employees were told to train their replacements.
Yeah.
And these are not these are skilled jobs. Good salary, middle class jobs.
So you had a guy who's like a fairly well educated tech in some field related to energy. And Edison got some guy from India or somewhere else who they could pay less on an N1 visa. And so they fired the American employees, which is not how that's supposed to work. It's supposed to work that, these visas are only for jobs they can't fill. But instead they had the job filled with a well-paid American. They fired that American and replaced them with a guy on a visa.
And of course, the insult to injury, he trained his replacement before they fired.
Well, that's very common, actually.
Yeah, because if you go ahead and quit, you don't get your severance package.
Well, you don't get your unemployment insurance.
Don't get your unemployment
so
insurance.
they really grind your nose in the shit, hoping that you'll quit so that they can not bear that cost.
And I love to say this, Ross Perot was right. What couldn't be outsourced is being insourced.
You hear that sucking sound? That's your job. Well,
and our middle class lifestyles, and our tax base.
Ross was a capitalist, and Ross was a businessman, and Ross understood the evil, greedy nature of all people, and that if you didn't regulate them in certain ways, they would do things that were bad for the general community. And he, acted in the general best interest of the community, and everyone made fun of him, and instead they elected Bubba.
And if remember we watched the State of the Union address, and the only time I could recall that Obama actually got cheers and clapping from the Republicans when he was talking about increasing the number of H1B visas.
Well, because the Republicans are representing people who want to get rid of your job entirely.
So the prospects for the middle class just keep looking dimmer all the time.
Here's what I don't understand, about my Republican friends. How do they expect to offshore the jobs and insource the jobs and still have any customers left?
I don't think I think they're just thinking to the end of next quarter and the end of the fiscal year and not beyond that.
Because, my business, which is the design business, my business has just been almost ruined in the last 30 years in California. I mean, people, the load from the legal side, from the regulatory side, is huge. And it's really, really difficult if you're trying to find English-speaking, highly skilled employees to find anyone anymore who does anything like this. And the customer base that can afford people who do good work is probably 20% of what it was 30 years ago.
Absolutely. You know, I find myself as someone who provides professional service always getting ground down in fees.
Mm-hmm.
Expectations are always having to be lowered and lowered and lowered.
Right.
So, well, Steve, any
well, and you know, the state of California, Bob Hertzberg, he wants to tax those professional service providers an additional 10%. Basically, he wants them to pay sales tax on their service, their customers to pay sales tax on those services. So that will further erode our customer base and make them willing to pay us less because, you know, they want to pay the same $100 for the same gizmo, right? So if 10 of that has to go to the state, that means we only get 90 instead of 100.
Well, for those not in California, particularly here in LA County, where we do pay 10% sales tax.
Yeah. Or the county gets as much as God if you're a Christian.
So tithe away, brothers. But yeah, I understand where they're coming from because their view is when you look at the mix of the economy, services have increased significantly, manufacturing and durable goods has fallen off.
But that was all due to their policies.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. Again, the big sucking sound.
Mexico.
And what's funny is, before the ink was even dry in NAFTA, those jobs were already going off to the Philippines and Indonesia and then China, and it is a mess. And we're right in the middle of it.
It's going to only get worse from here, you're saying, unless the people rise up.
Well, I'm thinking it's the continuing downward spiral of life where the bad days become the good old days.
Well, you know, it's funny you should say that because to my parents' generation, the Jimmy Carter years were just god-awful. And I look back at the Jimmy Carter years and I go, God, that was the last time I had any real money.
Right, and you could buy something without having to put it all on credit. And,
exactly.
Oh, you're sold to the
company store.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I had in the Carter years, I had a crappy job, right? But with that crappy job, I could pay rent and buy anything I wanted, even though it wasn't like a great job. Now, I didn't want a lot of the stuff that other people wanted. Okay, but with that same kind of job today, that's not even possible. You can't even pay rent. You know, you're living at your parents' house with that kind of job today, till you're 40.
Okay, well, Steve, we are up against our time window again. Boy, it always flies when we start talking about these weekend news wrap-ups, but we're really trying hard to keep them to 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Want to make sure we don't have everyone fall off and they get the best of everything we have to say. But, well, can't wait for next week.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be interesting.
It will be. Steve, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Kevin.
And have a great day. And
You
to our audience, have a super weekend and looking forward to talking to you next week.